Hey friends, I hope things are good with you. I was just reading Rolling Stone magazine. There's an interview from last year, it was published last year, with Pete Townshend, and he said some really interesting things about Neil Young. But I love The Who. Pete Townshend is one of my favorite guitar players, and it's a really thoughtful interview. I kind of forgot what that was like to read thoughtful, like interviews with rock stars who gave thoughtful, long answers. It was really good. Interview was done by Andy Green, and I enjoyed it a lot. But there's a part where he starts talking about, the interviewer asked him about a TV series called Freaks and Geeks. I've never seen it, but I guess they used a lot of Who songs in that series. And so he asked Pete Townshend, he says, I just rewatched Freaks and Geeks. They used a ton of your songs in really poignant and interesting ways. I'm wondering if you ever saw it. That's Andy Green asking Pete Townshend. And Pete Townshend says, yes, I did. It was a real buzz. I remember being very moved by it and very honored. It was a dark comedy show with deep swinging connotations about performance and education and all the things I'm talking about. The uses were very, very smart. In a sense, it redeemed and gave credence to the fact that I've always felt the worst person. Not sure what that means, but then Pete Townshend says, let's get into real trouble here. He says, the worst person to have control of Neil Young's catalog is Neil Young, and then he laughs. I think he's saying this playfully here. The worst person to have in control of Neil Young's catalog is Neil Young. Pete Townshend says, give it to me. I just think there's so much stuff there that could be just turned into joy. He's such an incredible writer, and so much of his stuff is just unknown, partly because he keeps it tied so tight to his chest. And I think Pete Townshend is talking about how Neil doesn't allow his music to be used in commercials or even movies, stuff like that. It's hard to get a Neil Young song for a movie, I guess. But Pete Townshend goes on, of course he didn't have happen to him what happened to me, which is The Who ended for a good 10 years. In 1982, The Who closed down and we weren't earning money. I started allowing my songs to be used for commercials, for film use, and not all of it was good. There's no question. Some of it was embarrassingly bad, but it earned money. One of the things that did happen in a couple of places with the use in CSI, it just hugely, dramatically, powerfully spread the word about the potential. These were some of the best songs that The Who had ever recorded. They were on TV over and over and over again. It just reminded people that we were still there. I think it probably helped us to come back. I don't remember, I didn't watch any of these TV shows, but that's really interesting that a whole new generation found out about The Who by watching television shows and hearing the soundtrack. Did you guys see any of these? I should have asked right off the top, man, what's your favorite Who songs? What's your favorite Pete Townshend songs? I really, like I said, I really dig Pete Townshend's guitar playing, and it's a reminder that there's so much more to guitar playing than playing leads. There's not a lot of dweedly-dweedlies in Who songs, and that's one reason I love it. But the guitar parts are always great and interesting. And the rhythm guitar is 99% of what you do all night long. But the interviewer, Andy Green, says, yeah, to come back to Freaks and Geeks, there's an incredible scene where one of the dorky kids comes home from school by himself. He's really lonely, and he makes himself a grilled cheese sandwich, but he puts on the TV and Gary Shandling is doing stand-up comedy. It makes him really laugh, and he finds real joy in the darkness of his life. They play I'm One the whole time. It made me see the song in a whole new way. Pete Townshend says, yeah, I think you're right. There's some great music supervisors that use music in great ways. I was just watching this bit on Instagram, and it reminded me there's this song that Dave Davies wrote for the Kinks called Strangers. That was used in a Wes Anderson movie. the Darjeeling Limited. They're coming off the train and they're walking down the tracks and they play this Dave Davies song. It was written about a suicide of a friend of his when he was a kid. He didn't write any songs for the Kinks, or he didn't write that many songs for the Kinks. And it's so moving and so great to see these kind of wild left field uses of songs. Wes Anderson is wonderful at using music, and he uses great supervisors. So I think people look, I personally think, maybe I'm wrong and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think people oftentimes look, they think of commercials like on television or whatever using music from rock stars. They see that different as being put into a Wes Anderson movie. There's very few people I know that will watch The Graduate and wish that there weren't, the Simon and Garfunkel. How do I say it again? There's very few people that I know that would think it was a bad idea for Simon and Garfunkel to put their music into The Graduate. It elevated that movie. It was a character in that movie. It's a great movie. It's lasted, through time. There's a lot of examples of stuff like that. I don't think of placements in movies the same way. And I also think that if it's somebody's music, anything they want to do with it, they have the right. It's theirs. They own it. They created it. They brought it into the world. They can do whatever they want, and then we can look at it and feel good or bad about them doing it. And I personally love that there are people out there like Neil Young who just don't do it. There's part of me that likes the idea that I don't know, the people won't do it. I like that. Some people just decide not to. Some of us, Neil was very successful very early and made a lot of money, and he was at affords you, when you make screw you money, you can say screw you to people. Most of us have never had that option, and I have lots of friends who have had music placed in television and movies and even in commercials, and didn't Guy Clark did that salsa commercial, had his voice in it. If you Google, you can find his audition. There's some voiceover acting site where, I don't know if it's still up now, but you could find Guy Clark's audition tape for doing voiceover stuff, and they had that salsa. Was it Picante? I don't remember what salsa thing it was, but I rushed out and I bought some of that salsa just because they took the time to use Guy Clark's voice in it. Nobody hearing it knew that was Guy Clark, but I don't know, I'm getting a little bit off base here. But I've actually had two of my songs and commercials now that I think about it, but there was local TV, one in Louisville, I think one somewhere in Indiana, maybe here, maybe in Indianapolis, I'm not sure. But a friend of mine was a director and needed something, and I let him use it, and I don't even think I took money for it. I was like, yeah, use it. Nobody knows who that is, and I don't think my voice was in it. I don't know. Just saying, I helped a buddy out with that, but I don't remember ever getting money for it or anything. Maybe I have to look him up. But as we skip down, we get back to Pete talking about Neil Young. This is Pete Townsend. He says, I've made many predictions which have turned out right and many that have turned out wrong. If what we're going to have with the glory of artists having the right to control their own careers in the shape of non-fungible tokens is that we're all going to buy videos of monkey heads, then screw it. Just screw it. Screw it. Screw it. And he didn't say screw it. It's just junk. Not that I'm against people making a quick buck, but hey. The thing about Neil Young is that in 2003 or thereabouts, Elliot Mazer, who had done a lot of work with Neil Young, came to introduce me to Pro Tools. He'd done the album Harvest with Neil. He'd just done a 5-1 mix of it. I sat down and had these big speakers from JBL set up in a 5-1 setup in my studio. I sat and listened to it. I was already a huge Neil fan, and I was just blown away by this record. This is Pete Townshend talking about Harvest. I thought to myself, this was a record I had forgotten about. How could that happen? Is it because I don't listen to vinyl anymore? I don't take vinyl on the road? Is it because I don't make my own playlists on cassette like I used to? The answers to all that, even back then, was a definite yes. We'd stopped listening to music the way we used to listen to music. In some cases, we need musicians of the Joni Mitchell and the Neil Young era, the Stones, the Beatles, the Who, and everybody to remember that there are loads of people that just haven't heard anything that they've done. They're buzzword names. They don't know. If you go on YouTube, you're likely to hear Neil Young at the Bridge School wailing away with his old Gretsch with a voice like an old lady. What we don't know is that he's written some of the most beautiful songs that have ever been written, and also some of the most rocking. That's true of Joni as well. So once again, that's Pete Townshend in Rolling Stone, published last year, interview with Andy Green. And there's a lot to talk about there. There is a whole generation of people, large amounts of people that have never heard, the Who. They've never heard, or at least maybe they've heard a couple songs and don't know who it is, but they've never heard Neil Young or Joni Mitchell, or even the Stones. And where are they going to hear it? So Pete Townshend is of the opinion to put it in TV shows and put it in movies, and it sounds like he wasn't too up on his uses in commercials, but although I don't remember the product, but there was a commercial with they used Happy Jack, and there was a kid with some goggles and he was building a go-kart or something like that. And that was really fun. I mean, it was really, really fun use of Happy Jack. You guys remember what that was? I don't remember. So that's the problem, is it was a nice commercial and I remember that it exists. And I remember the music and all of that, but I don't remember the product. So maybe it wasn't that effective of a commercial after all. I mean, it might have been dishwashing liquid or deodorant, or who knows. I seriously don't remember, but I don't know. I meet a lot of young people, and music will come up, and they have no idea about Neil or Joni, or Pete Townshend. And if they don't know about them, how are they ever gonna find out about Townes Van Zandt, and Guy Clark, and so many other people, or even me, We all start somewhere and we keep burrowing down and we end up into the subculture or whatever. So I'm curious what you guys think about that. I really don't. If somebody uses their music in those situations, for some reason, movies have never bothered me like that. I never thought about it as being such a bad thing with movies. Maybe because it feels like art. Even though it's a commodity, it feels like art. And I don't know, to me. But maybe I'm wrong about that. TV shows, it always seemed a little bit weird. And there's that stretch in the 80s where there were just so many bad placements of music in movies, really bad placements, and so that got kind of crappy there. But I don't know. When you're talking about Wes Anderson as an example, that's really one of the better. There's very few people that do it better than Wes Anderson as far as putting music in movies. I don't know, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, the way he does it. Now, if I'm talking about Pete Townshend, I don't know the next chance I'll get to talk about him, but there's a couple things that I love about Pete Townshend. If I have a favorite Who song, I have a favorite Who era, It's like the kids are all right, you know. Pictures of Lily, like that era, right in there. I love Pictures of Lily, and I listened to that song for probably 20 years, and then one day just kind of was strumming around on guitar to try to figure out how to play it. And I didn't even realize there was a key change in that song, because it's, if I remember right, it's in C through most of it, and then halfway through the chorus, it changes over to A, and it does one of those big Who build-ups, down, 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 Pictures of Lily, and it's just such a natural change right there. And then they go back and forth on that, and people don't realize how hard that is to pull off. It's one thing to want to be tricky and musical and throw in key changes or, you know, odd time signatures and stuff like that. But to make it to where you don't notice, it just is like you enjoy the song and you're along for a ride, that's really doing something. And I feel like that's, I don't know, they're good at that. The Kids Are All Right, it's one of my favorite Who songs. I love that early stuff. Happy Jack, I'm a Boy, love I'm a Boy, I'll crank that up. That era right there I really dig. I love just about all the Who stuff I've heard, but I'm curious what you guys dig. And it's worth saying again, Pete Townshend's guitar playing, I don't know, I mean, he's obviously a great songwriter, but he just supports the song. Everything's about the song and all that. I really dig that. All right, so I'm just going to read a couple questions here, and then we'll go on with our lives. But had a question from one of my Patreon supporters. This is Ish474. He says, very timidly, I'm going to ask another question. There's no reason to be timid. I'll try not to be timid with my answer here. But have you ever reconnected with one of your own songs later in life? He says one of his favorite things for him is to have an old favorite hit him later, and then he'll see it completely differently when he's in a different part of his life. Yeah. I don't listen. Once I've recorded stuff, I don't listen to it anymore. I figure when I've recorded it, I put it out into the world, I'm done. You know, I've done my part. Now it's for everybody else. It's for you guys. Like I say, just like with these videos, with my records, what I've done is I've put a message in a bottle, do the best I can, and then throw it out into the ocean and see who finds it. And it's crazy, but people find it, you know. Most of you guys found this channel by just seeing a bottle bobble along in the ocean, and you checked it out once, and a lot of you liked it and stuck around. That's the way I look at things. But sometimes I'll remember a song I hadn't thought about. You know, there's some songs that you record just to put on an album, and you have no intentions of playing it live. And after you've made a lot of albums, there's a lot of those songs, and I'll forget them a little bit, but yeah, I've definitely had that. I won't give examples, but I've definitely had where I'll kick around one at home, and sometimes you think, man, that would have been cool if I would have recorded it like this, and it's something completely different than what you did it, but it's that moment in time. You're doing everything you can to make it whatever you feel like is an honest representation, you know, shown in the best way possible in that moment. Like the most heartfelt, sincere, real representation in that moment. So that's what it is, you know, and then time goes by and that moment doesn't exist anymore. And you're a different person, you know, which is good. It's good to change. You don't want to be the same person at 50 that you were at 15. There's a lot of stuff happened along the way. Hopefully it affected you. Hopefully you learned from it, and you know, you become whoever you're supposed to be. You know, you might have a lot of the same values, and a lot of your core is the same, but there's a whole lot of wind and rain, you know, and snow that grind against the rock and shape it into a little bit different way, but it's still a rock. Anyway, So there's my half-ass answer to that. There's another question. This is Senator Jim Dracula. Is that your real name? Are you really a senator? Senator Jim Dracula says, as far as questions goes, I'd love to hear you talk about your recording history. Like, did you start off 4-tracking at home like many of us? And that struck me as fun because, yeah, I was planting trees like for 10 years. I mean, before that, I worked the door. I would play music and I'd play gigs whenever I could and just do my thing. But I was planting trees, and I figured that's what I would do with the rest of my life. And I was just touring. Since it's kind of seasonal, or spring and fall, I would be able to tour in the winter and in the summer a little bit. And so that's just kind of what my life was, and I was fine with that. But I didn't have a lot of money to record anything, and we didn't have Pro Tools and stuff like that. And there's people with great skills on a laptop that can record things, and that didn't exist. So it wasn't so easy to just record something. But I went over to my buddy Nick's house, and he had a I believe it was a reel-to-reel. Either TIAC or a Kai. I can't remember which it was. I feel bad I don't remember that. It was a 4-track reel-to-reel, and I recorded an acoustic album. He was out in his, if I remember right, he was in his garage listening on headphones as I was in his laundry room singing and playing, and just did some takes and recorded that. And that was just the only thing I had. Made an album with the best thing I could with what I had, and recorded that album, put it out. A friend of mine, Kyle, put some money up. He had a little record, like a home mom and pop record label here in Indy, and helped put it out. And magically, some people dug it, like people overseas, and some of that led to me going over there and touring for the first time. It's because they'd heard that record. And I kept making records. Now, I could have, this is where the lesson is, if we're talking about trying to learn a lesson from this stuff, I could have sat and thought, no, I'm going to wait until I can make the perfect album, until I can walk into Abbey Road, and I can have George Martin produce this thing and make it great. Not that those are my choices. I'm just using that as a ridiculous example. But I could have waited until that was the case, and maybe I never would have made a record. Or I could just do what I could with what I had at the time, and that's what I did. And it just so happened that became a tiny stepping stone that opened a door to a lot of, a small amount of people, but like important people overseas, a lot of promoters. I later found out, they're like, yeah, I got that record when it came out, out of curiosity. And that was Otis Gibbs' 49th and Melancholy is what it's called. Just home recorded. And you hear it now and you're like, oh yeah, that was definitely a guy in a laundry room singing into a 4-track tape machine. And it wasn't even like the cool Tascam with a cassette in there like Springsteen did Nebraska on, which I bought that. There's a book out that I just bought that I'm really looking forward to talking about soon. But it wasn't that. It was a reel-to-reel with a couple, like a SM57, probably 2 SM57s I'm singing into and playing the guitar into and just doing the best I can. But I could have waited for something perfect, and who knows what would have happened, if anything would have happened from that. But instead, I just did with what I could, and it became something that opened a little bitty door that I was able to walk through. And like 2 years later, that's how I'm making my living, is touring overseas. And I had another album out, and I put another album out. Just like a couple of years later, I'm making a living doing all of that. And it started with that, just throwing that message in the bottle. So yes, I have recorded the 4-track route and all of that. And Some of my favorite albums by artists are the ones that are the most bare bones and messed up. I said the other day, was it Frank Zappa? And that video I made the other day about Frank Zappa saying that, oh God, what was After the Gold Rush, I believe was the album, it sounds like a bunch of demos, and he meant it as a compliment. And I completely get that. There's so many records by artists that I later hear the demos and I'm like, oh my God, I like the demos way better, because you didn't get everybody else throwing in too many ideas and it gradually getting overproduced. I like the roughness and all of that of demos. But anyway, I'm going to leave it right there. It's a beautiful, beautiful overcast gray day, and I don't know. Tell me down below what your favorite Who songs are. And I did this interview with Joe Pug talking about Justin Townes Earl. It was really, really great, and I want to make sure some people see it. So click on that up here and watch that, and I'll catch y'all down the road. Much love to you.